Cemetery of Lost Souls. A Tale of Sin, Death, and Betrayal by Giovanni Sticco WGA West. The Church of Sorrows, 1984. Giovanni Serra was a priest of rare beauty, a man whose very presence seemed to calm the restless and soothe the broken. Tall, handsome, with a tranquil aura that drew people to him, he had become the spiritual anchor of his small town, tucked inland from San Remo, in Taggia, Italy. At 35, his face was serene, his mind sharp, his faith unshakable. The people of his town trusted him with their deepest secrets, their confessions, their sins. And in return, Giovanni did his best to guide them through the storm. But even the most devout can be tempted. One ordinary Sunday, a woman entered Giovanni's church who would shatter the foundation of his faith forever. Her name was Della. At the time, she was not yet the famous actress she would become, just a woman, seeking solace. She entered the church dressed in a soft, flowing spring dress, moving with an elegance that seemed to make the very light around her bend and shimmer. The beauty of the church and the religious art-painted glass windows blasted beautiful colors that complemented the view. Giovanni's gaze followed her as she approached the confessional booth, and for the first time in years, the calm facade he so carefully maintained began to crack. Her full lips parted, and she spoke. "Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned," she whispered, her voice low and melodic, a rich hum that reverberated deep in Giovanni's chest. Her words were simple, but the way she said them, the haunting beauty in her voice, had power beyond anything Giovanni had ever felt. He gripped the edge of the confessional booth to steady himself. He couldn't see her face, but the image of her soft lips, her body curving gently as she spoke, consumed him. Her confessions were dark, laced with temptation and desire, passions she could no longer suppress. Giovanni listened, his thoughts clouding, his resolve weakening. He knew better than to indulge such feelings, yet Luna's voice, like a siren's song, drew him in deeper with every word. It was only a matter of time before their affair began. The departure. The affair was swift, secretive, a whirlwind of passion and regret. Every stolen moment with Luna deepened Giovanni's longing, pulling him further into darkness. He knew he should end it. He knew the weight of his sin would destroy him, but his body, his soul, betrayed him. One morning, Giovanni could no longer bear the burden of his guilt. He packed a small suitcase, leaving his priestly attire on the bed. It was time to leave the Church of Sorrows behind, the weight of his sin pressed heavily on his chest. As he passed the church for the last time, he looked up at the Holy Cross. Its judgment was silent, but it was there, watching. Giovanni turned away. He wandered through the town, his eyes lingering on the places that had once been home. The town, the church, they seemed to watch him as he left, the cross above them towering like a silent judge. The cemetery Giovanni's path led him to an eerie, forgotten 19th-century cemetery. The gates were rusted, the ironwork twisted and misshapen from years of neglect. A crooked help-wanted sign swayed in the wind, its faded letters barely visible. Something, an inexplicable pull, drove him forward, urging him deeper into the overgrown graveyard. He took the sign from the gates as though claiming the place for himself and walked down the crooked, overgrown paths until he found a small, crumbling office. Inside, he met Mr. Lupo, the owner, a dwarf-like man with a strange smile and a voice that made Giovanni uneasy. Behind him stood Maria, his towering wife. She was a shadow of a woman, broad-shouldered and silent, with eyes that never blinked. Mr. Lupo's voice was high-pitched but friendly. "Well, a new face. We can always use a hand around here. Maria and we manage the place, but it's a lot for just the two of us." Without a word, Mr. Lupo gestured for Maria to kneel. With a grunt, she lowered herself, and Lupo climbed onto her back. Giovanni smiled faintly, though it was more out of awkwardness than amusement. Their odd partnership was disorienting, unnerving. They headed outside and gave Giovanni a tour of the cemetery. He pointed out with his finger, "The work is simple," Mr. Lupo said, his tone suddenly more serious. "Tend to the graves, bury the dead, and make sure nothing disturbs the peace. But be warned, Giovanni. There are things in this cemetery that should never be disturbed." Giovanni hesitated, but something about the place pulled him in and made him stay. He agreed to take the job, starting that very day. The murder of Luna Della years passed in relative quiet and peaceful days, but the nights, those long, silent nights, were different. The wind seemed to speak, howling through the trees and making the cemetery feel alive, watching. Then, one evening, Giovanni sat in his small cabin, nursing a glass of red wine as the crackle of an old radio filled the air. The words that followed made his blood run cold. Luna Della, the famous actress, has been found murdered on the set of her latest film. Giovanni's heart stopped. What? Luna dead? The report was grim. After a violent confrontation with her mobster husband, Luna had thrown him from a balcony with a force that seemed unnatural, her eyes glowing with an eerie light. She could no longer live with his mental and physical abuse. Her husband's family had ordered a hit, and Luna was silenced, stabbed repeatedly by a hired killer on the set of her film, The Evil. Giovanni's world tilted. He had loved her, he had been consumed by her. Now, she was gone. The funeral procession a week later, Luna's funeral took place at the cemetery. Giovanni stood at the edge of the mourners, his heart heavy with grief and guilt. Old women wept, their faces twisted in sorrow, as trumpets blared. Luna's family, the Dellas, stood on one side, her ex-husband's family, the Vieri crime family, on the other. The tension between the two families was palpable, an electric charge hanging in the air. As the funeral procession began, the sound of gunshots shattered the silence. Chaos erupted as the two families exchanged fire. Innocent bystanders, including a seagull, fell in the crossfire. Giovanni watched in cold disbelief as the world around him descended into madness. Luna was gone, and the world had become a darker place because of it. The night of resurrection, full moon, 1 month later Halloween night came, and Giovanni found himself at Luna's grave. The air was thick with an unnatural chill, and the wind howled, sounding like words from the dead, as though warning him to stay away from harm's way. He then returned back to his cabin to relax, drink more wine, and hang out with his singing cat Caruso. Unbeknownst to him, a coven of witches had entered the cemetery, preparing for a group of 7 cloaked female figures slipped through the iron gates, their movements soundless on the damp earth. They carried black candles, their flames flickering as if whispering secrets to the darkness. A lone owl let out a warning cry before vanishing into the trees. At the heart of the cemetery stood a freshly sealed grave, its marker bearing a name half swallowed by shadow. Luna Della, born 1960, died 1986. The witches formed a circle, their faces hidden beneath heavy hoods. They placed candles throughout her grave, then burned herbs and spices. They then began rhythmic chanting, synchronized movements. Then stepped forward was the high priestess. She took down her hood, displaying her beautiful face. She then placed a small bundle of rosemary, bay leaves, and a white bone and placed it on top of the grave. The others followed suit, adding coins, locks of hair, and strips of crimson cloth, offerings for the spirits who guard the veil between life and death. A dagger was drawn, its blade reflecting the flickering candlelight. The high priestess knelt, tracing an ancient sigil into the dirt with its tip, whispering words in a forgotten tongue. The others joined in, their voices rising and falling in an eerie chant, rhythmic like the beating of a heart. The chanting grew feverish, the witches swaying in unison. Back at Giovanni's cabin. He's really having fun with Caruso singing, he's clapping his hands, dancing, he is completely drunk. Jump cut back to the witches. One of them lights a scrap parchment and lets it burn to ash. Written upon it is Luna's name, binding her soul to their call. A final chant is spoken, sharp as a knife through the night. Then silence. The candles waver, the wind dies, the ground trembles. A single breath, ragged, gasping, wet with the weight of the grave, rises from the darkness below. And then, from the crumbling soil a green mist of fog appears, then separates. Luna emerges. She floats out, untouched by decay, her beauty as radiant as ever. The witches kneeled before her in awe. Luna looked straight ahead and spoke with confidence. "I'm back." A knock at the door. Giovanni sat in his cabin, his cat Caruso still serenading him. The candlelight flickered in the window, casting dancing shadows. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. Giovanni froze. No one ever came here. Another knock. Who the hell is knocking? Nobody knocks on my door, Giovanni muttered. This is a place of the dead. A final knock came, sharp and demanding. Giovanni stood, his pulse quickening. He opened the door shirtless and fit, and there stood Luna, her hair flowing like silk, her smile both seductive and terrifying. "Hey lover," she purred. Giovanni screamed like a little girl and slammed the door. Moments later another knock came but aggressive. Giovanni opened the door dazed and confused. Luna entered, her presence as commanding as ever. Caruso began to sing low, a eerie tune that resonated in the silence between them. Giovanni closed the door behind her, still spooked out. Later shadows of their bodies dancing on the walls as passion ignited between them once more. But in the morning as Giovanni awoke, Luna was gone. Was it all a dream or was it real? Unfinished business. Giovanni rushed to Luna's grave, only to find it unearthed and the casket empty. And witchcraft relics surrounded the site. Luna's subsequent return was a perfect chance to deal with unfinished business. Her family was planning the hit, but she beat them to the punch. A revenge like no other of her ex-husband, her mother-in-law, and the others that chose her fate into death. One by one she eliminated them all in death. The devil among us. Months later. Giovanni grew suspicious of Luna's new carefree life. She spoke often of Stefano Morboso, a film director with whom she had worked with in the past and had an affair with. And now a new film was in the works, The Haunting of Elizabeth Bell. He insisted that Luna star in it. Giovanni's cemetery was to be the backdrop for the film. The filming went off well, Giovanni always on watch what was going on. After the completion of the film, days later a wrap party took place. Both the living and the dead were there. It simply was grand. Meanwhile, Giovanni's investigation led him to a chilling discovery. Stefano was no mere director. He was the desolate one, the devil himself. Using Luna's resurrection and beauty to fulfill his own dark purposes. One night, in a desperate attempt to stop him, Giovanni confronted Stefano with a holy cross. Stefano laughed at Giovanni. "That's for vampires, you jerk." Giovanni slipped it back in his pocket. "Darn it, sorry." Then a dagger was pulled out. The battle had begun, a great fight it was indeed. Giovanni looked as though he was winning the battle. Then Stefano was defeating him. Then Giovanni plunged him in the heart with a dagger, but before Giovanni could celebrate his victory, Luna turned to him. "I never wanted you to save me," her eyes gleaming with cold disdain. "I never wanted you to win." Stefano got up, pulled out the dagger and threw it to the ground. Giovanni froze. But before he could react, Stefano split open the ground beneath Giovanni with his hands, pulling him deep into the abyss. Giovanni yelling out. Stefano's voice echoed and laughed as Giovanni fell deeper and deeper in the center of the abyss. "You died long ago, Giovanni. That night in the cemetery when you tripped and cracked your skull, you were already dead. Everything you've experienced, the love, the pain, the hope, it was all an illusion. You've been here all along, just another lost soul." Mr. Lupo, Maria, even the other souls in the cemetery started laughing. None of them were alive. They were all trapped, bound to the cemetery for eternity, forever working in the shadows of the dead. Luna and Stefano continued laughing out loud. The end.